profile of the inspirational Arthur Ashe in half an hour. First, we're keeping trim with Monty and Gardener's World.
Hello, welcome to Gardener's World. At this time of year, I like to just gently trim the edges of hedges, which is a hard thing to say, easier to do than say. And what it does is tighten the garden. I'm not hedge cutting, it's too early for that. The birds are still nesting and I don't want to disturb them. I'm just getting these vertical lines crisp and straight, and that could be where there's a path or a window in a hedge or a gap. And it is incredible how it pulls the garden together and tightens it all up. This week, we meet a man who will go to almost any lengths in pursuit of his dream of the perfect lawn.
To cut the grass at 5 mil and keep it looking good. You're constantly at it.
It is absolutely his life.
And the garden designer, Adam Frost, goes looking for inspiration in a Somerset garden that has been created without a square inch of lawn.
Wow, I was not expecting that. With the water in the background, you honestly could be by the seaside.
As part of making these new beds in what was the orchard and where we had compost heaps and leaf moulds, big transformation, I'm re-turfing the grass. I'm standing now on what I want to be a grass path with a border on one side, border on the other, coming through and joining a grass path at the back. If this looks as though it's prepared as a flower bed, that's a good sign. It's a terrible mistake to think that turf is going to cover up a multitude of sins. It doesn't cover up any. It actually reveals them. You've got to prepare thoroughly. Dig the ground and then rotivate it. And at that point, you want to rake it smooth and get rid of all the stones that you possibly can. And it goes without saying that you remove all weeds. Dig them out patiently. They will come back to bite you if you leave them in the ground. Right, I'm going to budge you. Come on. You go that way. Now you can see that it's shady. It's not heavy shade, but it certainly isn't the full open sunshine that grass likes best. But nowadays, whether it's seed or turf, if you go to a good dealer and explain what it is you want the grass for and where it's going to go, they should supply you with an appropriate type of grass, and that's as important as the general quality. So the next thing to do is to tread it. And there's no shortcut to this, but to simply stomp and keep stomping until it's done. And I can feel beneath my feet, in some places it's hardly doing anything, but every now and then I'm sinking down. And if you don't do this, it will sink down after you've laid the turf. Now we've got a relatively level playing field, so to speak. I can use the finest rake I've got and just scratch that smooth. OK, we're now ready for the easy bit, which is laying the turf. I would say that when you get your turf, it's going to come like this in rolls. What you do want to do is use it as quickly as possible. And if you can't use it within 24 hours, unroll it, because the problem comes from lack of light. This is a nice, tough, hard-wearing ryegrass. Not suitable if you want a fine lawn, but perfectly good If you want ground where you're going to wheel wheelbarrows or children are going to play a lot of football and ride their bikes, but it will never be fine. There is always a question whether to use seed or turf. The advantages of seed are that it's considerably cheaper and very easy to prepare. You prepare the ground in exactly the same way and you simply scatter seed and then press it in. However, it's slower to establish. The great advantage of turf is that once it's down, it looks pretty good, and you should be able to mow this and walk on it after about 2 to 3 weeks. And I think turf is great for smaller areas, but if you're going to do a large area, seed tends to be much more economic. What I'm doing with all this patting is 2 things. The first thing is making sure that the roots are in contact with the soil. There are no air pockets, there are no dips or hollows. It's right down on the ground. Another reason for getting the ground level. The second thing is to push the edge as tight as I possibly can against the previous turf. Put these together really tight and work along so that they are absolutely packed together. So you can't see the joint at all. It's always a good sign when you have to hunt for the join. Like a really good toupee. It's worth pointing out that you must have boards and you must try and avoid treading on the turf. Because until it's got roots, when you tread on it, you're either going to form a divot or you're going to move it. And you'll know there are roots growing because the grass will grow. It's not long enough to go right across. So I need to join 2 pieces together. Now, you never make a joint at the edge. If you have a small piece at the end, the small piece is going to dry out much quicker than the bigger piece it's attached to. So if you have a thin piece to make the width you need, always put it between 2 longer pieces. There we go, smaller section in the middle, and now we'll really tamp this down hard. The bed curves round here. So I'm starting to put my turf staggered out into steps into the curve. And that means that I can cut the curve and I'm going to waste slithers of turf. Again, this is why you always want to order at least 10% more than you'll actually need, more than the measured area, because there will be some wastage. But essentially that's it. The next stage will be to cut the edges, give it a good soak, and that's the job done. Now, I confess, I'm not that worried about the quality of the grass. As long as it's flat and it's green and it can be cut regularly and looks nice, then I'm happy. But we went to visit Stuart and Anne Grindle in Doncaster, and I think it's fair to say that Stuart takes his lawn very seriously indeed.
We open the garden for the public every year. And a little old lady came to me 2 years ago and said, "Mr. Grindle, what's the hardest plant you grow in the garden?" And I said to her, "You stood on it." Which is very important, to take the dew off the garden in the morning. It gets rid of any debris on the garden, and also worm casts. Because if you leave a worm cast on and you mow over the worm cast, it will flatten it out, and a 5 mil worm cast then becomes 25 mil, and it will kill the grass underneath it.
There are 3 G's in Stuart's life: golf, gardening and grass. Every day he wants to be in it and working at it for perfection.
To cut the grass at 5 mil and keep it looking good. You're constantly at it. I'll cut the lawns every day. I cut it in 2 directions. It gives a finer cut and a finer finish. And also, it's good for the grass. To me, a lawn is like a fitted carpet in your lounge. If you go in your lounge and you've only got furniture with no carpet, it doesn't sound right, doesn't look right. Now, this is an important part of making the lawn look good. I do this 3 times, 4 times a week, so that it gives a nice, neat edge. When you've cut the edge, you go around, rake the soil, and then run your hand round it to give it an equal depth. I've never allowed my son to play football on it or cycle on it. If you've got children, you definitely don't want a lawn like I've got.
A lot of work goes into it, a lot of time, a lot of money. But when people come and walk through that entrance there, they go, wow, I can't believe it.
Scarifying is another important procedure to the lawn. If there's any coarse grass, it will rake that coarse grass up, lift it. Also, the one I use, it creates a drill. Now, a drill is a groove which gets down to the soil. When I overseed, the seed then has got to purchase into the ground and doesn't sit too long on the top. These are the 2 seeds I overseed the lawn throughout the year. On this side is a very fine fescue. You could seed your lawn with that on its own and you would have a good lawn. This at this side is grass seed, and this is a pure bent. Now that really gives a fine finish to the lawn.
You can go and see Stuart's lawn and even tread on it on August the 8th, when he's got an open day, and all the details for that can be found on our website. Now, I shan't be treading on this for at least 2 weeks, and as a rule of thumb, keep off it until it's long enough to mow, and keep the grass rather longer than you intend to have it for the rest of the summer. That way the roots will grow stronger, and then next year you can mow it as much as you like. I've got some chrysanthemums, bought as rooted cuttings in spring, potted them up, I've grown them on, they've gone from the greenhouse to cold frame, and now they're ready to put outside. I have to say, these are the first chrysanthemums I have had any part in growing for 50 years. And so this both takes me back to my childhood, where we used to grow them in the greenhouse and treat them as completely tender plants. And they were grown with huge care, and also to an age which has all but gone, the age of the 50s and the 60s, where lots and lots of people grow chrysanthemums. So they've gone very much out of fashion. And they're very easy plants to grow. This one is called Pennine Jude. Now, these are not particularly tender. I don't think they would take the full weight of a cold, long meadow winter. But they're probably tougher than I'm giving them reckon for. And what I want this to do is to grow into a nice bushy plant that will go on flowering into autumn. I'm planting them here as border plants. mixed in the general easy muddle of a border. I want them to meld in. So they're fairly small at the moment. I'm spacing them about a foot or so apart. I'll put another one in there, and hopefully they will fill this area. And I've given them a really sunny spot. It's good soil, it's well drained and yet rich, but this is quite late to be planting out chrysanthemums. Normally here at Longmeadow, sort of Chelsea or just after Chelsea is about right. But we've had a really cold, dry spring and early summer here. And so I've held back on planting out. But actually, once they're up and running, they should be undemanding plants. Now, the real purpose of growing these is to see if I can reconnect with chrysanthemums, to see if the fact that I haven't grown them for 50 years has been a mistake and an absence. But the only way you find these things out is if you try them. Even if you resolutely do not want to grow chrysanthemums, there are some other things you can be doing this weekend. Some hardy geranium varieties, like Geranium pratense or Geranium phaeum, have produced most of their flowers. If you cut them back hard, right to the ground now, that will stimulate new growth that will bear a new flush of flowers in about a month's time. Planning ahead for next winter's veg harvest, now is the time to sow brassica like kale and cabbage. Sprinkle the seeds on a seed tray, cover them over lightly, and then sit them in a tray of water to soak up moisture. And they can either be put in a greenhouse or will germinate perfectly well outside at this time of year. Even though they may be showing signs of fresh and vigorous growth, steel yourself and pull up your wallflowers. They have done their stuff. Take them to the compost heap, where they can be shredded and will add their goodness back into the soil. I think it's been a good year for roses, and I love roses of any kind. What's been good for them is the slightly cold spring, which has meant that they've come out slower and lasted longer. It's been dry, so if they're prone to black spot, that's less of a problem. And there's been enough sun to enjoy them. Now, I've got lots of roses in the garden of different types, but these three were something of an experiment a couple of years ago. I've never grown yellow roses before, so I chose these three, which are Charles Darwin, the Pilgrim, and Crown Princess Margarita. And they all seem to work in well together. And what I like about them, these are modern roses, is that they keep on flowering. Now, at the moment, roses are absolutely my favourite thing in the garden. And if you have a favourite plant in your garden, we'd love to see it. And one of the ways you can do this is send it to our new Facebook page. It's called BBC Gardener's World, and if you go to it and press the like button, then you can send your photographs. And I look forward to seeing them all. Now, the garden designer Adam Frost, having won 7 gold medals at Chelsea, is now turning to his own garden. And he's gone to a gravel garden at Blagdon in Somerset, looking for inspiration.
I've spent my life gardening, getting my hands dirty, planting things, watching them grow, building things with my father, gardening with my grandparents. It's in my blood. One of the best things about what I do is being outside and really watching the seasons unfold. Every single year there's something different going on. But you know what, as a garden designer, I spend most of my life creating gardens for other people. And this year I've decided just to spend a little bit of time on me and my garden. Back at home I've terraced the garden out, and there's an area at the top that I plan to create this wonderful gravel garden because the sun sits there beautifully and it's somewhere I can really enjoy with the family through the summer months. So my hard landscape's finished and I've got this blank canvas, and now for me this is the best bit, bringing it alive with plants. You know, for that though you need inspiration, and I tend to get that sometimes from the wider landscape, but it's also great to go and see how other people have done it. Wow, I was not expecting that. With the water in the background, you honestly could be by the seaside. This is Holt Farm in Somerset, and the reason I've come here is because the soil is clay-based, which is very similar to mine back home in Rutland. And at the moment, its gravel garden is absolutely stonking. That's largely thanks to head gardener, James Cox. It fascinates me that you're in Somerset, you're in a valley, you have a decent amount of rain down here. Why a gravel garden?
That's a very good question, you know. We really have had to react to the longer, drier summers that we seem to have.
Oh, right.
And the plant collection that we did have in here, they used to struggle over those summer months. We are on actually prominently clay soil here, which, you know, you wouldn't think of that as being conditions for a gravel garden. But what we've done in here, and in all of the garden, we've added tons of organic matter over the last 15 to 20 years.
So do you add gravel as well?
Yeah, we have done. It's all aids with the drainage and made it possible to grow the type of plants that we need for those summer conditions.
So that proves, really, if you get the soil right, you can literally create a gravel garden anywhere.
Yeah, it seems to be working really well because the plant collection in here that you find in a classic gravel garden with sandy conditions are all doing very, very well. They're thriving, actually.
So if I create my garden, you just give me 1 or 2 plants that I've got to have in my garden.
Key plants, I would say, silverleaf foliage, which really copes with bright sunlight and hot conditions. So plants we have here are things like stachys, artemisias, and those are going to be your kind of mound formers and your carpet formers. But you've got to set them off with other things, create a bit of drama and a bit of theatre in there. Big, tall uprights like verbascums. Absolutely brilliant. And they'll seed as well, so you'll give you lots and lots of free plants every summer as well. Cicericiums, again, great with them. As recommendations, I would say those plants are a must to have in your gravel garden.
Well, I tell you, it looks absolutely beautiful.
Thank you very much.
I think one thing to remember when you come to places like this that are vast, don't be put off by the scale and the size, because there'll be loads of little ideas in here that we can take home. You know, my little gravel garden is little, so we're going to go around here and we're just going to pick up a few ideas, like the grasses sitting in the gravel, the things that are starting to look self-seeded. What I love about this garden, in a way, is that it seems to have taken on a life of its own, so things pop up in different places that maybe they're not meant to be. When we work our way down, you've got this wonderful bed here of stachys, with these sort of little bits that are popping up, so you're things like the Cicericium, and then in the distance there you can see what the Digitalis are doing. I think what I love as well is the fact that actually there's lots of plants in here you recognise, so there's the poppies, there's the geraniums, there's the, the salvias, things like that. Do one thing that ties this whole thing together is actually the colour of the gravel. They've been really clever here in the sense that they've picked a colour that actually references the architecture of the building, the walls around the outside of the garden. So that's an important thing. When you're choosing your gravel for your gravel garden, don't just choose any old gravel. Away from the main garden, I've found this fantastic sort of, it's like a gravel meadow, and it's full of damselflies, but also, after that, it's got these wonderful stipia heads, that wonderful sort of like oat head that moves around, and the sound in here is fantastic, and I think that oat colour will really go well with the gravel that I've got in mind for back at home. When you go to gardens, make sure you take pictures, make notes, even do some sketches. Anything that helps you sort of capture that information to take home. Do you know, I love this little plant, Centranthus. Some people think it's a weed, but it grows anywhere. It'll grow in walls, and this is definitely one that will reappear up in my gravel garden. Do you know what? I've had a really lovely day, and I've learnt a lot today, and a few things that I'm going to take away, really, are The strength of these borders, they're not just a load of plants planted in gravel. You know, there's a real structure to this garden, and I'm really, really looking forward to getting back and getting stuck into mine.
Come on, H, look here. Well, we will be visiting Adam at home in a few weeks' time to see how he's getting on. One of the many joys of this time of year is that the harvest really starts to increase and roll in. These broad beans were sown in February and I planted them out in April. So although they're not very big plants, they're fairly stunted, they've got plenty of beans to harvest. Broad beans are much nicer when you pick them small. In fact, if you see, the beans are small and tender, and actually you can eat these raw. They're sweet, whereas when they get bigger, they have a slightly bitter casing. And when they get really big, you have to peel them. But the luxury of having a small broad bean, even if you just mix up a few in a pasta dish, is really good. And that's one of my favourite ways to eat this time of year, just taking from the garden, not complicating it, not making it too much of a big deal, just keeping it really simple. These peas are called Carabi de Mouzane, and they are a flat pod variety. So you cook them, pod and all. Just lightly blanch them in either a bit of oil or butter. They're a real treat. It's like eating asparagus. Absolutely lovely. I've got a few nice baby beetroots here. I'll just have a few of those. There we are. Aren't they lovely? And those are delicious, either roast or else boiled and eaten whole. I like them hot. Now, this is the Tuscan kale, Cavolo Nero. It's supposed to be really good for you, and I know it's trendy to make into juices and whatever, but I love it just as a cooked vegetable. And if you take the outer leaves, it encourages new growth. But this time of year, it grows quicker than we can eat it. There we go. Right, we've done the main course, now for pudding. I know at this time of year, especially with Wimbledon, strawberries are the great treat, but I tell you what, there isn't a strawberry in the land that you can buy that will taste as good as a homegrown strawberry, eaten warm from the sun, grown in your own garden. And that taste and that smell takes you back to childhood, it takes you down to those special occasions, but that satisfaction of growing something yourself and then enjoying it at the perfect moment of ripeness. It's one of the greatest pleasures of gardening. Now, talking of Wimbledon, because of the tennis, next week we're on at the later time of 9:30. But I'll be here, so join me. Till then, bye-bye.
So, with the start of Wimbledon just days away, BBC Two remembers the men's singles final winner of 40 years ago, Arthur Ashe, more than a champion, next.